Hello, welcome to Practical Neurobiology, Stress and Trauma. I am Wendy. I'm an orgasm coach and a neural pleasure coach. And if you didn't know, I'm also a business coach. I am here to talk about, stress and trauma, because if I learned anything throughout the years of working with my clients, it is that stress and trauma are like the biggest impactful thing in our life. And in fact, one could really argue that it is stress and trauma that actually holds us back from everything that we ever want to accomplish. Through my years now of working with people, I have really gone into understanding what is happening on a biological level. A little bit of background on me even becoming an orgasm coach. I really got into it just to talk about the pleasure aspects. I wanted to stay as far away from trauma as much as possible because I personally had a shit ton of trauma that I was dealing with, and I just wanted to explore pleasure and help other people have fun and forget about all that other stuff. Well, as it turns out, when you start really understanding the whole orgasm process, you realize that it all starts and ends in the brain, which is your nervous system. And the biggest impact on orgasms and experiencing pleasure is stress and trauma. Through the years, I had to figure this shit out. So, a little bit of backstory about why I do what I do and how I do what I do and how I got to this information. I learned kind of early on that a lot of the information that I was taking in from people were other people's interpretation of the science. So, I started seeing conflicting information or one person saying something and then realizing that other people were just regurgitating it and then finding out that that one person said something that was wrong. And so a few years ago, I kind of stopped. I didn't read any books, like all the good books that you're supposed to read. I just didn't do it. I didn't want to get other people's viewpoints being my basis and my foundation. So I really went in straight to the research, straight into the science, looking at the studies, reading through the studies. I literally have read thousands of studies. And that kind of is why I got to this point of really understanding the neurobiology at the level that I've gotten to. I have now started to read books, and it's really interesting to see how I got to the same conclusions that are talked about in a lot of the books. So, when you're going through this, there may be some information that is conflicting to something that you've read before, or maybe you've heard some of it, but it's been said in a different way. I use real terms like words that you use in common language, but it really is anchored into the actual science, like the actual biological processes. I will probably throw in some of it as we go. Not probably, I will, because that's just the way my brain works. But for the most part, I do try to use language that is accessible for most people. If you're watching this on the replay, which that you are watching this on the replay, because this recording is specifically for the replay, and if you have any questions about what it is that I am talking about in here, or you just want me to clarify, please respond to the email that is sent out with the replay information, and I will answer your question. And if necessary, I'll even record another video. All right. So, what are we going to learn here today? So, you're first going to learn what is stress and what is trauma, because that is the foundation of what this class is about. And then we're going to learn about 6 different types of stress responses. And this is where a lot of information is out there floating around that gets quite confusing. But I have developed a really easy way to kind of explain it and tie it into the neurobiology and not just the psychological frameworks that you hear about. And then I'm going to go a little bit deeper more so you understand what is happening in your body and why it has such an impact on your life. And then we're going to talk about how do you actually change your response to stress, because I think most of us are very reactionary. At least I know I was. I'm less so because now that I've developed practices and I know how to handle it a lot more. We are going to talk about how you do actually change your response to stress. And then I'm going to go over 2 different breathing techniques that I'll explain it all when we get there. All right. So, what is stress? By definition, stress is a physical or mental response to any demand. And what that really means is that anytime something is causing you to take action, that's basically considered stress. And that's on a biological basis. And the real root of the stress is uncertainty. So anytime we have to take action that is uncertain, like we don't know the outcome. And it can be good or bad, it doesn't matter. It's still the same kind of stress response that is happening in our body. So anytime anything is uncertain, like, is he going to kiss me? Are they going to yell at me? Same actual biological response that's happening in your body. So uncertainty is the foundation of stress. And that leads us to the stress response. And once you understand what is happening as you respond to the stress, then so much of your behavior and other people's behavior starts to really, really make sense. And that is why I'm here sharing it with you. The way I have found this to work the best is created the stress response map. So, as I said, I'm also a business coach, and I do work with mostly coaches and therapists to help them be better coaches and therapists. And one of the things that I help them with is being trauma informed. And through that process of helping them understand it, I kind of develop this map that is tied to biological processes. So if at any point in time you're interested in which biological process it is and I don't mention it and you're curious, just ask me and I will send you a message and a reply about it. When I say stress, I often will say stressor, but it could be an event, or it could be a person. Most of us, when we're thinking about like trauma and actually in general, our stress that we experience is usually because of people. So the stressor, more often than not, actually ends up being a person. And so when we're talking about the stress responses, a lot of times I will be using terminology that is based off of a person, but it could be an event as well. Now, I got to start with the brain. The whole stress response process is this response that the brain kind of creates. And the function of the brain, in very simplistic terms, but very accurately simplistic terms, is the brain is an energy resource management system. It is not this crazy air traffic controller trying to interpret data and make decisions and all that. It's so much actually more simpler. I mean, although air traffic controller is pretty good because it's just like directing things. But what it is like all life on this earth, maybe not life in other planets, but on this earth, all life evolved to be able to handle the radiation, aka energy of the sun. And it is everything that happens and has evolved and existed on this planet is in response to this energy from the sun. And so organisms, as they began to develop, became more and more complex in being able to handle and distribute the energetic resources that were within that organism. So that kind of gets us to today, where as humans and all the animals that you see on the planet, we have these brains that basically allocate energetic resources. And so that's the function. And so when there is a stressful event, meaning there's uncertainty, this system within our body gets activated called stress response. And so the stressor happens. And the very first thing that the brain is going to try to do is going to figure out if you can control the situation. Because if you can control the situation, that's going to be the easiest and it's going to be the best use of your energetic resources. And so the way it does this is there's two systems that get activated. One is the social engagement system. This is it's called the salient network. This is a system that is present in all mammals. So like dogs, apes, gorillas, all mammals have this social engagement system. And it is what babies depend on. When a baby is born, they're in lots of different stressful situations, like they're hungry, they need to be changed, they need to be held, like all the different things. The system gets activated where they are looking to others for help and assistance. And is our first instinct to actually look for help when it comes to whether you're the stressor, like the person who's under stress, I mean, or the person that the you're looking to help, right? So like we'll just say mom and child just for the sake of me getting my words straight right here. The child will have a certain response of the salient network and the mom will have a different response within the salient network. It's still the same network, but it's just the different sides of it. The baby will be looking to the mom for help and then the mom will hopefully be calm and her nervous system will be regulated. She'll be grounded and present and able to support and care for every single need of the baby. That's ideal, right? But as we know, that's not always the case. Luckily, humans Not mammals, not all mammals. This is something that is uniquely human, and it was a theory just like a few years ago, but as of October of last year, 2021, some scientists actually published their research that they finally had done and proven that humans are unique. And when we get stressed, there's another brain network system that gets activated, and that is the executive functioning, aka central executive network. And basically, this is, if you've heard of the prefrontal cortex, this is like all the thinking part, the logic and skills. So, like, if you practice something, this is something that this network is able to provide. So, if you think about it from an energetic resource management system, if you already have the skills and the knowledge to be able to do something, it's very, good energy resource management to be able to use those skills. Most mammals do not have this. So they either go look for help, or what happens in this situation is they get into what is now then called the fight or flight response. So if they don't have someone around to help them, then meaning they can't control the situation, they will go to the first phase, which is flight. Because let's face it, the best way to get out of a situation is to avoid it in the first place, right? So if there is a stressor that is happening, whether it's an event or a person, the easiest way to manage your energetic resources is to not use as many and avoid it. So we will naturally try to flee away from the stressful situation. If we cannot flee, then we will try to fight it. That takes a little bit more energy than getting away from it. Now, when this happens, when this whole system is activated, this is where you might hear like the sympathetic system. So the nervous system has a few different parts. There is a part of it called the autonomic, I like to call it automatic system, where there's two parts. There's the sympathetic, which is go, go, and parasympathetic, which is stop. It's not exactly like that, but it's more or less kind of the definition of sympathetic and parasympathetic. If you think about most all of our organs in our body, there's two aspects to it. We breathe in and we breathe out, and our heart beats up and constricts. Everything in our body has this on, off, on, off, on, off. And that is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic systems working together. So when you're under stress, though, what happens is that sympathetic part gets really highly activated. So that way we can get away from the stress. Then, if we can't get away from it, we're going to try to fight it, use a little more energy, but we're going to try to do it. But what happens when we can't fight it? Then we go into the situation where our foot is still like on the gas pedal, like the sympathetic is like putting your foot on the gas, let's get ready and give it a lot of gas so we can just get out of here. But then we're going to put the brake on too. So that way we can stay really still and frozen. You see this all the time in the animal kingdom, like a deer in headlights, frozen right there. And that is this parasympathetic and sympathetic system both being activated so that way they stay frozen. It's a really good, healthy response, especially like say you're coming up against a gorilla. If you come up against a pack of wolves, you're really going to want to try to flee there. If it's a crocodile, you're going to have to fight it because you're not going to be able to flee from it, but you might be able to fight the crocodile. Now, a gorilla, you're not going to be able to get away from it and you're not going to be able to fight it. So your best response then would be to freeze and to make yourself as small as possible and not a threat. So it's a very good evolutionary stress response, and it serves us very well in a lot of situations. But as you can imagine, having your foot on the gas and on the brake simultaneously, because that's a lot of gas and a lot of energy for the brake, that means you're using a lot of energetic resources, right? So the brain is going to be like, we need to do something about this. We need to conserve resources. So during this process, when you first have that sympathetic activation, a whole bunch of things get turned on in your body. Your muscles get extra blood flowing to them so that way you can escape. Your eyes widen so that way you can take in the scenery and see what kind of dangers and threats are there. Your ears are able to hear more. Like whole bunch of senses come online that are not normally that active. But as you start using more and more energy, your brain is like, we're running out of gas here. We need to conserve resources. And so it will start shutting down information. Now, part of how the brain does all of this function is there are a ton of signals that are coming up from the body at any given point in time. The brain just takes that information and then allocates resources by creating neurotransmitters that then send signals. The neurotransmitters are like messengers, and they send messages over to the organs or other parts of the brain to create certain kinds of hormones. And then those hormones tell the different organs to be on or off and doing all these different things. And that's kind of the process here, right? So when you are stressed or the stressor is happening and it's taking a long time, your body's like, we really need to start turning things off. So it's going to do things like maybe turning off certain sensations, because do you really need to feel whether or not the air is gently caressing the back of your neck when you're in a stressful situation? Probably not. Unless the danger is coming from behind you, then that's going to be really heightened, right? So your brain is going to kind of pick and choose what makes sense to turn off. We don't know what's happening because it's just slowly turning off all of this sensory information. And this is the process of dissociating. So you might have heard the term dissociation, and this is really what's happening. So your brain is conserving energy and it's just turning off sensory input information. So that way it can conserve energy resources, because it takes energy to process that information that's coming in. And if it's deemed unnecessary, it's going to turn it off. And so this is what's called flop. So flop, if you think about it, it's like, like, I don't have any more energy. I'm just gonna, like, because you're still in that frozen state, but you're really now just gonna be like flopping. You're not just frozen in like, panic and still standing still. You're just gonna be like, too much information, sensory overload. I must not pay attention. These are all tied to biological processes. Like, there's different parts of the nervous system. Like, some have like, when you're in that fight or flight, there's a lot of activity in the myelinated nervous system areas, where there's like quick information like going back and forth. But then the parts of the nervous system that are unmyelinated are still sending information, but those are the parts that start to get turned off when you start getting into this flop state. But anytime this is happening, though, because we are human and we have this unique feature of this executive function right here, then our brain has this way of creating a little bit of a detour. And so if you're in the more fight or flight response, you're going to go into what's called a friend response. And basically, it's like what it sounds like. You're going to make friends with the stressor. Let's say your roommate comes in and they're completely freaked out because their partner did something, and they are like being like crazy emotional, like more so than normal. Well, maybe you had a bad day and you're tired. You may get in a fight with them and be like, oh my God, just calm down, right? But then you also might be like, you know what? Let's just try to figure out this situation, right? Because maybe you don't want to get in the mood for fighting, because your skills and your previous knowledge knows that if you can get your roommate to just calm down just a little bit and try to come up with a plan, that she's going to calm down and then everything will be back to normal. And now you will not have to deal with the craziness, AKA the stress of her being crazy, right? So this is the friend response. It shows up in a lot of different ways, but that was just one example. Something like Stockholm syndrome, where people who are captured or being held hostage will start to like fall in love with their captor. This is the friend response in action, because like if they can become friends with their captor and get them on their side, they can actually reduce their own stress. If you think and know that your captor is going to not kill you, that is definitely less stressful than when you think they're going to kill you, right? So this friend response is a really adaptive response. And it's a reason why a lot of people try to fix things when people are really emotional and they can't hear, they're not there to just listen. And it's because for them, it's overwhelming to listen to it. They want to reduce their own stress by trying to kind of create this detour for the stressor. And then if you don't have those enough energetic resources to be able to do that kind of friend response, then there's this fawn response. So remember, at this point, your body is like using a lot of energetic resources, right? So it's not going to be able to rely that well on the executive functioning part. It's not going to have too much of that logic coming into play. Instead, it's going to use like skills that you've practiced before, rely on different behaviors that have reduced the stress. And this is where people pleasing comes into play. So like if you do not have the energy anymore to be able to like reduce the stress and logically think your way, or you're like 2 years old and you don't have enough skills and practice, you may discover that it's actually just easier to just comply with the stressor and let go of all of your needs and wants and just do whatever they want. And so this is fawning. This is just kind of, giving up and like using the least amount of energy to be able to get through and reduce the stress. And most of my clients that I do work with have a tendency to have a lot of these fawning, people pleasing tendencies. And it's not surprising because most of us, at least as I said, most of my clients grew up in a situation where when they were, say, emotional as a kid, quote unquote, acting out or throwing a tantrum or whatever the terminology you want to use is, most parents did not know how to handle that themselves. So their stress response is like to yell and put away the stress, right? Like, let's get that stress away from it, like flee from that stress. Well, the easiest way to make that stress flee, like to get away from that stress, is to put that stress in the bedroom, right? Or have them stand in the corner, go by themselves until you can calm down and use your words. Like, there's so many different ways this shows up. And so what happens is as you get practiced in that kind of stress response, when you are put in the corner as a young child and you're sent to your room, it's super stressful. And so most kids learn how to just suppress all of their wants and their desires and their voices. They won't be angry, right? Like, they won't speak up. Instead, they fawn and they people please in order to get back into the community and back accepted. So you can see how all of these different responses show up in many different ways, and they do all serve a purpose, and they are really, well ingrained behaviors, responses to stress, and they serve us really, really well in the moment. It's just then what happens like afterwards, right? So let's say we now have all, like whatever the stress is, we use whichever stress response, and now the situation is done. Maybe we just waited it out until it ended. Maybe we try to fix the situation, calm the person down, right? Whatever it is, right? Maybe we're just like, you know what? I can't even like handle this at all. And you just flop and ignore it, right? Then what's going to happen then is there's going to be something needs to happen to this energy, because at that moment when your foot goes on the gas pedal, when you're stressed, there's a whole bunch of chemical reactions that are happening in your body, and that is creating a tremendous amount of energy. And if you remember from science class, energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? So energy can only be transformed and moved and transmuted, or all the many different terminology words, all the different ways you can say it. But basically, the energy still has to move out of your body. Now, there's several ways that energy moves out of there. Peeing and pooping are two ways, but they're very controlled by that autonomic system. So we don't normally have much control over it. However, I do want to mention, because this is a way to remember, the brain is all about conserving resources and energetic resources. If a hugely stressful event happens and it is very close to for the time you have to pee, your bladder is really full, from an energetic standpoint, it would be using much more energetic resources to hold your bladder shut when it's just about ready to release. Instead, your brain will be like, you know what? Let's let go of this piece so that way we can handle the stress. That is why some people pee their pants when they get stressed. It's because they were just getting ready to pee. And their brain is like, you know what? Let's get rid of this because we don't need it right now while we're handling the stress. It's also the reason why sometimes people shit their pants too in certain situations. It's also the reason why you throw up, because if you just ate and there's food that hasn't been digested, like, the brain is going to be like, no, we don't have time for digestion right now. We need to get rid of that food because to try to digest it is going to use too much energetic resources. And we have got this super stressful event that is happening right now. So let's just get rid of that food. So there's all these different things that happen to release energy and conserve energy. So the peeing, the pooping, throwing up, that's one way of like moving energy and conserving energy simultaneously, depending on the situation. One of the other really awesome ways that we release energy is through our tear ducts. There's this little tiny hole, and like all this energy like pushes up and pushes the fluid through, and it's this huge release of energy. We also have like thermal energy and kinetic energy. So like kinetic energy, you move, but with the kinetic energy where you're moving, you're also creating chemical energy to be able to make your muscles contract. Sometimes it's a little bit of a wash. So one of the easiest ways to get energy out is through breath. Breath and movement are really the two best ways to do that. Now, animals kind of know what to do. So this process is called resolution. Animals do this all the time. So if that deer had to run away because a predator was coming, once they get in a safe distance and the predator has stopped chasing them, they'll shake, right? Ugh, you'll see them, they'll completely shake. Or dogs will shake, or after they like come in from like, stressful situation, or when they're wet, right? So many animals, like they're not embarrassed. Like they'll just do what their body is telling them to do. They're not worried that the other dogs or the other deer are going to judge them for releasing energy. They just release the energy. There's no holding back. Unfortunately, us humans, though, are often in situations where we feel like maybe we won't be accepted if we release energy. Like, for example, one of the ways that I actually release energy is through laughter. I am definitely that person that makes jokes underneath stressful situations. I will try to get everyone to smile. A little bit of my people pleasing things, but it's also my stress relief, right? Because when you laugh, you're releasing that energy. And it's something that I learned as a kid. It served me well as a way of releasing. However, some people get really uncomfortable when I am trying to make jokes when I'm stressed, and they might find me rude, or I've learned making jokes at a funeral, most people don't like that. So I no longer make jokes at funerals. Um, and so instead, I hold all of that energy in and I don't release it. And what happens during that situation is that energy has to go somewhere, right? Like if I'm not releasing it, what's happening is it's getting stored in your body and it's getting stored in your fascia. Your fascia is this web that surrounds every single organ and muscle. It's like this huge, like web-like structure that scientists are completely fascinated by because it can be liquid or it can be solid. They don't know how it does it because it like goes back and forth from between the different states. But anyways, it's this amazing, cool structure that is everywhere, everywhere in your body. And so that energy that during those stressful situations, if you do not release it, will get stuck and stored in your fascia. And we kind of all experience that at some point in time. Like, I don't know about you, but my shoulders get sore a lot because I get stressed and I'm holding it up here. And that energy gets stuck in my shoulders. And that's like one of the big places I do it. And most people do. A lot of people, hold the energy like in their shoulders and their neck and all that stuff, right? So that's one way that you can actually see like firsthand how this stress gets stored there. Like it's just this chemical processes that are happening to get you out of the stressful situation. When you don't release it, it gets stored in your body. And that is essentially what trauma is, because not only does that energy get stored, but what happens is at night when you go to sleep, there is a process called like sleep spindles. You can look it up. It's really cool how the whole process happens. But during this one part of sleep, you're basically the everything that happened through the day kind of gets like edited and clipped together, paired with like it pulls out information, memories from before, it gets paired together, put together in different configurations, and then it gets stored actually into your body. So that energy gets stored into your fascia. And there's part of your brain called the hippocampus that actually helps retrieve those memories, but the memories themselves are actually stored in the body. So if you ever read the book Body Keeps the Score or Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine, they talk about this concept about how the body actually holds on to the memory. So it is a very proven concept. It's just that I don't know why, but a lot of people don't pair how it all happens. It's this process happens during your sleep. So everything that's going on in the body, the positions of your body, the emotions, because emotions actually live in your body. Emotions have a body sensation. Feelings and thoughts are in your mind, and your emotions are in your body. And so there's these two parts, the memory, the feelings and the thoughts, and what you think about the stressor and the events that happen with the emotional state. They get paired together when you go to sleep. Besides these systems getting activated, there's another system that gets activated anytime you're stressed out, and that is the default mode network. The default mode network is responsible for all of our default modes. This is the reason why we're able to drive a car and type and talk and write and do all kinds of things where we don't really have to think about every single little detail of it. It's all of the subconscious reactionary things that we do in life. That is the default mode network. That gets turned on when you get stressed. When you go through resolution, it goes down because when you're stressed, you're taking in all this information. So you want the default mode network activated. That way you can learn from your mistakes or learn from the situation so that you don't have to repeat that same stress again. So the default mode network, when you go through resolution, kind of gets turned down. If you do not go through that resolution phase, though, you kind of stay in that default mode network. There's this increase in what's happening in the activity. And this is the trauma. This is why we get stuck up in our head, because this default mode network is completely activated and operating, and we can't stop thinking about the events. And that is the basis and foundation of what we think of when we experience trauma, because trauma is the same stress, right? So we understand what's happening from the brain on an energetic standpoint, like it's using the different energetic resources. So if we got enough sleep, it's going to be different than when we don't have enough sleep, because we'll have a different kind of energy. If we've been eating well, we're going to have more energy to be able to handle the stress. And if we haven't been eating well, then we're going to have less energy to handle the stress. So our different stress responses are going to be different based on the energetic resources of our body. So this whole process happens within the brain, and there's two parts to, as I said, mentioned a little bit earlier. The hippocampus is really responsible for recalling memories. It has the mechanisms for our memories to be pulled up. There's the amygdala, which is the fear center, and basically it's the stress detector. It's like, okay, it's something uncertain. That's what fear is. It's uncertainty, but it is more than just fear. It can be, as I said, uncertainty can also be good, but it's just a matter of the amygdala is like, hey, I don't know what to do in this situation. First, it's going to activate that sympathetic system. So it's going to activate the sympathetic adrenomedullary axis. And basically, this is going to have a cascade of functions so that we can make adrenaline so our muscles can get us out of the situation. Remember, first thing that happens is flight. So we want to get ourselves out of there. And then the other thing that's going to happen is the hippocampus is going to send signals over through the HPA, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So adrenal makes a whole bunch of our hormones, in particular our reproductive hormones. The pituitary helps with the digestion. When we're stressed, there's signals that get passed down. And what happens is then it's going to be like, okay, we should not be thinking about having sex while we're running away from a lion. And we're not going to work on digesting our food right now because we've got to get away from this lion. Instead, let's make some cortisol, which will help with the increase of the muscles being able to move, the awareness of what's around in your environment. So you can pay attention, so you can get out of the stressful situation. And there isn't a difference between physical stress or emotional stress. The body doesn't know it. Stress just means anytime there's uncertain action that is happening. So your immune system gets activated. Because let's say part of that stress was you got cut. So your immune system is going to get ramped up. So that way it can protect you from any bacteria or viruses coming into that cut and get rid of them as quickly as possible. It's all a really magical, amazing, orchestrated system, how this all works together. The problem is we're not supposed to stay in the stress state, right? You're not supposed to have as much stress, but unfortunately we do. But then also what happens, remember that executive network system, the reason why sometimes it's activated and then sometimes it's not, when you move into that stress response map, sometimes we just skip it, because if we do not have enough dopamine, is the neurotransmitter, there's not enough dopamine production, the prefrontal cortex does not work properly. So that whole executive functioning is not going to work. And the hippocampus is going to be like, nah, we have too much cortisol, not enough dopamine. We're not going to engage that executive functioning network. We are just going to stay in that stress response. We're going to flight, fight, freeze, flop, and do the friend response, the friend and the fawn. That's all it can do at that point if there's not enough dopamine in there. So these systems all work together. And so your biology, like what is happening in your body at that moment, it changes. So if you got more sleep, if you had the right foods, if you got enough exercise, if you hadn't been stressed out, you're going to have more dopamine going through your body, which means that you'll be able to think your way out of a situation. But if you didn't get enough sleep, if you didn't get enough sun, if you don't have enough water for your cells to replicate, that means there's more energy that's needed for cell replication. That means that there's not enough dopamine there. So that means we can't activate that prefrontal cortex. This is how the system works together. This is the neurobiology, right? Um, and so that is the basics of it. And then there's this other aspect of acute versus chronic stress. Now, you probably, what I'm going to go through right now is going to make sense now that you know that stress response map. Like if you had learned about just stress on its own, like going into the stress research, this is kind of what they talk about acute versus chronic. But when you pair it with that stress response map and understanding the actions and how they're all related to the different neurobiological functions and what's happening, it all kind of makes sense why this system goes the way it does. So number one is alarm. So this is like the stress is happening, and this is a normal biological function anytime there's uncertainty, which is part of life. And it is actually it's everything. Like life, there's always going to be stress. Like it's never going to go away. And so it's an automatic thing that happens. The neuroendocrine, so that's the nervous system talking with the endocrine, which is your hormones, and how that all works and functions together. And it changes and it fluctuates and adapts based on the amount of stress and the energetic resources available. And then it's immunological, that immune system gets activated. So it's also behavioral, right? The social engagement system is activated. Our body is completely capable of handling stress. Like it's just amazingly a manageable system. Brain knows exactly how to direct the energy to be able to handle any kind of stress that comes up in our life. So first you have that alarm phase, and then the cool thing that happens is that we go into what's called the resistance phase. So as long as it's not just like one really quick thing, which most stress isn't, it's a little bit more sustained, we actually go into a very like stress creates this like protective effect. There's a whole bunch of biological functions that happen, and it's actually in this state of stress that all growth happens. Like a plant that is never stressed, like if you put a plant in a vacuum with enough air and water and food, but you have with the air, like it's still though, there's no movement in there. That movement creates stress. Like on a plant, the plant won't grow. Like everything needs stress in order to grow. As a human, as a plant, as an animal, all of it, it is the stress protective phase that actually growth happens, right? So stress is not a bad thing. Stress is a very important thing to the evolution of animals and plants and all species here on this planet. So I don't want you to think of stress as a bad thing, right? The problem happens is when the stresses continue. We'll have to adapt then. We have these really good, solid, strong biological responses to the stress. What happens then, if it continues, though, we have to adapt and change. And this is where, the problems begin. Fatigue starts to come in, our thinking about that stress response map, we're flopping now, right? Like we're conserving resources. And then we get into this exhaustion phase. And so that sensory input information gets turned down. But if your immune system is still activated and you're still got too much cortisol, you're not going to be making that dopamine. You're not going to be thinking clearly. You're not going to be making the hormones for your reproduction. You're not going to be digesting your food properly. And this is when disease happens. It is when we continue with these chronic states of stress without being able to pass that energy through that resolution, when we're holding on to that energy. This is truly why stress is impactful in a negative way. It is only when we go through these long, sustained, stressful situations without giving our body these chances to go through resolution and get rid of that energy that was built up during the stress response. So that is all the biology part. We talked about the nervous system a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about the brain and the mind and the functions. And this gets us into brain waves. I think it's important to know that all of these systems and all of this, it all works together. Like the stress is not bad. We're supposed to have stress. That is where our growth is. We're just not supposed to be in it for a long time. Like, and if you're never stressed, that's not good either, because you're not going to grow, right? So all of these different functions serve us, right? And so even when it comes to like these different brain waves, you will often hear people talking about some of these and saying like, yeah, we need to get in them. But I would just want to kind of explain all of them because they do have their drawbacks. We're not supposed to really live in all of them all of the time. And so um, we will start actually with beta because this is the beginning of the stress response. If you think about it, this is, something happens. We want our brain to be thinking quickly. Let's get a plan and get us out of that stress, get us away from the pack of wolves that are chasing us. Do we have to go up a tree? Like, right? We want to be able to think really clearly and quickly. It is a really good thing to have that ability to think quickly and get yourself out of trouble, right? Or into trouble, sometimes, as the case may be. But we don't want to be there all the time. But it's tied with anxiety because, like, if you stay in that state, you're going to become anxious, right? Because that means that you're not breaking through that uncertainty. Everything is still feeling uncertain and you're worried about things. And so you don't want to stay in that beta, right? We want to come down a little bit and reduce that thinking. And that's where the social engagement system really helps us with. Like, if you've got people around you that are grounded and calm, they will help bring you, reduce your heartbeat and your breathing. The whole social engagement system, the way it works, is called quantum entanglement. Every biomechanical system, when they're with each other, will actually start becoming synchronized together. If you've ever been to a clock store, you'll see all the clocks are like going exactly at the same time or exactly opposite. And it's the way things work. So the people that were like, wow, I didn't vibe with them, they might just be on the opposite, uh, kind of wave of you. But then there's people who are like, oh yeah, it was so easy because you guys synced up. And so eventually, and probably as you're watching this, you are probably synced up actually with my heart rate. There's a lot of studies that have been done to show that even when you're watching someone talk, you actually sync up with the speakers on the TV, on the movie, on the video. It's why we feel so deeply when we watch things, in particular when we're watching things or when we read things. We actually start getting into the same like excitement that the author was having. And then same with music too. If you ever really stop and listen into the music, you can actually sync up your whole heart with the people who are creating the music. So that social engagement system is a very powerful system. As I said, it's the very first one. It's what babies rely on to be able to make it in this world. So the alpha, it's like in the middle because that way we can adjust accordingly. And this is, when we learn, right? Like if you're a baby, you're going to be watching your caregivers, what they're doing and learning like how you're supposed to respond to them in order to get your needs met. It's this whole beautiful little dance and, I don't know the word I was trying to say. But anyways, it all works beautifully together. And so we want to get into alpha sometimes. We want to have this learning and coordination. But then there's also above that, though, like if you're thinking about complex thinking and stuff, there's another phase called gamma. And this is when we get into, by the way, we get into all these different brain waves while we sleep. So there's different things that are going on. This gamma wave brain state is when we're processing all of that information. So it's really interesting. We flip from alpha to gamma during those sleep spindles. And yeah, it's kind of cool. And so this is when we're creating, making our memories and we're learning and we're processing and all these things going on. But it's a very internalized state. People who maybe are meditating, it's very internalized. You are not connected with people when you're meditating. You're going within. So it's got this feeling of there may be a feeling of connection to a higher power, but that's a very internal, going up kind of energy, right? So like that's gamma. That's this higher consciousness, right? What the yogis are trying to always get to. But it is not a socially engaged state to be in. So if you really want to be connecting with someone, you want to be more in that alpha. And that alpha state is like that flow state that people are always talk about. Like when you get in flow and like things are just moving really easily, this is the alpha state. And then we have theta. And from the stress response, what is happening when you are in freeze, you're actually in a theta state. And if you think about what's happening, there's a lot of energy that's being going on. So your brain is actually kind of going to slow down a little bit because so much energy is being used in your body. So it's kind of got to slow down and conserve energy somehow, right? Like it's all about energy resource management, right? And so we're freezing, we're taking in information because remember that whole default mode network is activated and the sympathetic is activated, even though the parasympathetic is going on too. There's a lot of things. So we're just taking in a ton of information. And so theta is also the state of hypnotherapy or EMDR. This is the state that they're trying to get you in where you're completely aware and taking in information, but you're like calmer and basically frozen, right? um, Kids from birth until 7 spend a lot of time in theta. They are taking in this information and they're not processing it quite in the same way that we do as adults. Once after the age of 7, we start going more into these beta and alpha, and this is where logic and stuff starts to come in. As a mom, this is something that I learned and found so completely fascinating. If you think that you are able to logically talk to anyone under the age of 7 and like, wow, they're so smart. They figured out how to like, I told them they were going to do this and they understand the consequences. No, 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 no. They understand rules. They are taking in all the information and they are figuring out how to play by the rules of that person. And so there's no logic going on there. And it's the reason why a 3-year-old with their grandma will behave one way, but with their mom, they'll behave a different way. And with their teacher, they'll behave a different way. They know how to play the rules of the game. And it's because of the theta state where they're taking in all the information. Then, if you're really using a lot of energy, your brain will kind of go into the flop state. Remember to conserve more resources. And this is the delta brainwave. And they all serve these purposes. So the theta and delta, for the most part, we really shouldn't be getting into them too much during the day. We should be alert and conscious and slow and thinking and processing. We really don't want to be in this theta and the delta, not as adults. When you're young, it's different. They serve their purposes. But as adults, the time to go into theta is right as you're falling asleep. Because what happens is most of us start off in beta and we're like thinking all crazy, but then as you start to drift into sleep, you actually go through the alpha, the calming thing. And then right as you're about to fall asleep, you go into theta and then you drop into delta. And then when you go into the delta, the brain's like, all right, let's kind of turn off the consciousness of the mind so that way we can start processing the events. And then it will go through these different processes. And so you actually go through alpha, but you won't be conscious while you're in alpha because you went through this phase. Now, if you have something like PTSD or CPTSD, which is chronic PTSD, what happens is you get stuck in this loop between beta and theta, and people who have PTSD have a very hard time getting into alpha. And this is because the default mode network is on. When the default mode network is in this like really like intense state, it's very difficult to get into alpha. And so I want to mention psychedelic because psychedelics get a lot of people ask me about it and they get brought up, and it's pretty cool, fascinating research. So psychedelics actually help bring slow down the default mode network so that way you can flow through alpha and you can actually start to process your information without going through this cycle where you're going into beta and theta and you're not getting into that deep sleep where your memories can get processed, because it is in that sleep process, like these different phases where those snapshots, the body snapshot and I think, did I say the body snapshot and the memory snapshot? I hope you did. If not, I'll have to rewatch this video just in case they didn't. All right. So the body snapshot is the emotions and the memory snapshot is the feelings and thoughts about the event. Those get paired together during those certain phases of sleep. If you have PTSD, it'll be very difficult to get into those phases. And so those emotions and those feelings and thoughts still kind of stay at the surface and they don't get stored in your body the way they're supposed to. Ideally, we wouldn't really even completely store them too much in our body and release the energy, but there's like excess energy, the body snapshot, the memory snapshot, and it's all getting stored and it keeps getting triggered every single day and it doesn't get processed the way it's supposed to. So that's kind of why these brainwaves are kind of important to understand. So like it's important that you flow through all of them throughout the day and learn how to get into that alpha state. Maybe you need to do meditation too to help with your gamma, because the more time you spend in gamma, it's actually easier to drop into alpha. So there's some correlations here. So the more time you spend in beta, the more time you'll actually be in theta as well. As I said, there's these correlations between these different brain waves. And so you want to be able to flow through all of them. And so that is kind of talking about, oh yeah, default mode network. So I did mention it. So it's about like our subconscious, it's on autopilot. It does involve multiple structures in the brain. It's also our social cognition. It's our imagination. Default mode network is a really cool, awesome thing. It's not like with everything in the body, like they all serve its purpose. The body is really capable of handling anything that life gives you when you have the right practices and skills to keep moving the energy through your body. And so, as I said, it gets activated upon stress response, and then it decreases during resolution, and it gets increased activity if you do not go through resolution. So then how do you change your reaction to stress? Because that's kind of probably why you're here, right? And how do you heal your trauma? So you really have to take a holistic approach, because just like each part of the brain doesn't have just one job, it has multiple jobs, and it's how everything works in conjunction with each other. You have to treat your whole being the same way. You can't just focus on one area and expect all areas to change. It just doesn't work that way. And so I do find that a lot of times one of the easiest ways, and people kind of get really kind of stuck here, is focusing really on the physical body. I did it too. I was like, I just want to bypass this trauma healing stuff and just focus on the physical part. I just wanted to understand how food and sleep and supplements I could take and how it could change the biochemistry in my body and, like, not think about all of the other stuff. And the truth is that it all is very important. We need all of this. We need good food. We need the earth element, right? We need sleep. It's a biological function that does a lot of things, like when the toxins come out of our brain, because all of these different processes, there's like byproducts of those chemical reactions, and those are toxins that actually float around. And unless we get enough sleep, we end up with those neurotoxins still in our brain, which then reduces our ability to handle stress. So we want to have good sleep so that way we can handle more stress, right? Or handle just the amount of stress that's in our life. We want to get sun because the more sun that you get, the more dopamine you can make. And if you don't have enough dopamine, then you can't convert the sun, and it has to work together. By the way, if you have a dopamine deficiency, something like ADHD, which I have ADHD, sun is super, super important, but you may need vitamin D to start supplementing with in order to then get the benefits from the sun, because without enough, like if you've gone too far through the depletion cycle, it doesn't work as well. And then we need air. We need good air. And we also need our environment to be clean and toxin free, because that creates stress on our body. We need water. Water is super essential for cell replication. So if you do not get enough water in your body, your cells will not replicate correctly all of the time. Most of the time, yes, but not all of the time. And that can cause cancer. And also, what's really interesting thinking about it too, when you understand the energy, how it gets stored in the fascia. Well, as that energy builds up and builds up, it creates this pressure. And actually, what ends up happening is that pressure from the energy that's stored in your fascia creates little mini nuclear reactions in our cells that damages our DNA, and that those damaged DNA gets passed on through our genes, whether it's through the egg or through our sperm. This is what we call transgenerational trauma. It's actually, the scientists have shown that the damaged DNA can pass through 4 to 5 generations. So our environment and how we handle trauma, we may be starting from a deficiency already, like our DNA may not be wrapped correctly. And so when that cell replicates, it's replicating incorrectly. So that's why we may be predisposed to certain behaviors, because it's literally in our DNA. The cool thing is that you can actually change that. Get sleep, get good air, get good food, make sure you get enough water, have a clean environment, and move your body. So we want to really think about moving our body. But then we also want to think about, as we're moving our body, to the emotions, right? So remember how that energy gets stored. There's a body snapshot or emotional snapshot. So every time you move your body, you may release some emotion that was stored in there. You will probably not remember it, because the emotional energy storage is our unconscious mind. Our unconscious mind is collecting information all of the time, and it's always getting stored. And as we learn, our memories get stored in our body. And most of the time, these memories are just tied, it's a body snapshot and a memory snapshot. And so sometimes we have thoughts and feelings about things, but other times we just store that emotion in there. So it's the reason why, if maybe you've ever cried at the end of yoga, like in Shavasana, happens all the time, because you literally have moved stuck energy through your body. And so now your body wants to release some of that energy that you've started pushing through. So crying is a really efficient way of releasing that energy. So an embodiment practice is going to be really important to work with getting this energy out of your body. And meditation, mindfulness, movement, like these are all super, super important parts of releasing energy from the fascia. But let's just say you release the energy through the fascia, or you do sound therapy, like if you could do a sound bath, super healing for the DNA. They've shown that certain sounds and frequencies will actually help the correct raveling of the DNA and repair it. So sound therapy is really great. But if you are not also pairing it with like some mindset work, you're just going to have the same behaviors that cause that stored energy to begin with. So you may go through all of these healing practices, but if you're also not pairing it with mindset, then, or like therapy or working with a coach or working on self-improvement, really working on changing your feelings and your thoughts and how you choose to show up and choose to behave, that has to be paired together. Otherwise, you're just going to go back to the same exact patterns that you had before. Also, if you're only focused on that and you're not working on, you don't have an embodiment practice, you're not working on feeling your emotions and letting them ride through, you're just thinking about them, you're still going to be stuck, right? You're still going to have some of that stuck energy, and you're not going to make as good transformations, and healing won't be as quick if you're only focused on these areas. It depends on where the energy is stuck and how it's stuck and how it shows up, but it requires this overall approach. And then there's another aspect to it too, which is spiritual. Now, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about there is an inner wisdom that is within all of us that we can connect to. We all know it. Sometimes we're reactionary. We're not thinking it, like there's no logical, and it's not even logic. There's no, like, we look back at our behavior and we're like, oh my God, who was that? That is not me. Like, I'm so sorry. That is not how I normally behave. We've all done it, right? Like that's that reactionary, subconscious, mental aspect of us that, you know, kind of takes hold. It's that default mode network taking over, right? So we want to learn how to actually connect in to the inner wisdom and like build our confidence, our self-confidence, and learn to trust ourselves and learn to be compassionate with ourselves, because as you're going through all of this, you're going to experience so many different emotions. Like even if all you're doing is like running, right? Like sometimes like you run and get really angry and have like a weird random memory, or maybe you're on vacation with your loved ones and you're relaxed and it's safe and you're feeling free. And all of a sudden, a memory comes up and you just cannot let it go. Or someone does something, you can't let it go. This is because you have lost this connection to the spiritual part of you. And the thing about all of these different systems, there's different energy systems. If you remember from science class, say you've got, electricity running down a wire, right? And there's a signal coming from here and a signal coming from here. Once they come together, they collide and either explode, collapse, or whatever, like they change, right? They are not, the signals don't keep continuing. You have to bypass them. They cannot collide with each other. So our bodies are the same way. We have different energy systems throughout our body all at the same time. Your nervous system is a certain type of energy. Your fascia is a certain type of energy. Your physical body structures, that's radiant energy. So your fascia is electromagnetic energy. Your nervous system is not quite electrical. It's actually more complicated than electrical, but electrical is the closest thing that people use to it, but it is its own energy system. And that's why it doesn't collide with the electromagnetic system or the radiant energy, right? And then there's the spiritual system, and there's an energy of your spiritual system. It's called the biofield. It is observable. There's two sources of the biofield in your body. One's in your heart and one's in the pineal gland of your brain. And they emit this biofield energy, right? So these different energy systems all, work together to make you. And if you ignore one of those systems, you're just not going to transform and transmute the stored energy that's in your body, aka trauma, right? So this is how stress and trauma play together. The stress, all your trauma was stress that was unresolved. And it doesn't matter if it's big trauma or little trauma, like obviously we know big trauma, impacts us, right? But this sometimes I'm sure you've seen this, like sometimes there will be two people in the same plane crash, right? And they both survive and everyone else dies. One of them still thrives. They learn how to like, go through life because they, maybe they had the right kind of social system and community around. So that way they were able to enact their social engagement system, help regulate their nervous system. Maybe they're have an embodiment practice or a mindfulness practice, or right, like they have these different things in place so that way they can resolve the stress of the event. And then there's other people who don't have these systems in place. They don't have a, embodiment practice. They are not working with someone to shift their mindset and their thoughts and work through their feelings, and they're not connected to their self and their wisdom and working on that energetic system, and they're not supporting themselves physically, and they will struggle. And so it isn't necessarily the events. It is how we resolve the energy that was created from those events, and how we choose to show up, and how we choose to shift our mindset and work with our body. And so stress management and controlling your emotions, it is not about controlling your emotions. You will never control your emotions. Your emotions are meant to be experienced. They are a signal of energy that is moving through your body that needs to come up and be released. That's all it is. So anytime you're triggered by anything, it is a sign that your body wants to heal, right? It's like, I have been holding on to this energy and now I got this trigger and now I want to release it. Can we release it? And then if you just shove it back down because you're trying to control it, you're just shoving it back into your body and it's going to stay there and it's going to keep coming back up because your body actually does not want to hold this trauma. It does not want to hold this energy. Your body always wants to get into homeostasis. It wants to be healed. It wants the energy flowing and being, well-being. Like that is our natural state, and our body is always trying to get into that natural state. So if you want to change your response to stress, then you want to work on all four aspects of yourself, of these energy systems together and in a complete package. This is what I do. I have a program starting in a few weeks called Quantum Sexuality. It's for women only. So the guys are watching, I'm sorry, not for you. But the practices of, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, those are essential for anybody who has stress and trauma. So it's not about controlling your emotions, it's about learning how to work through it, how to experience the emotions as they come up without judging and being compassionate with the thoughts that come up when those memory snapshots are released and those body snapshots are released as you move this energy through your body. So that's what you want to do, is take this holistic approach. Now I'm going to the last thing, which is breath work. As I mentioned, energy has to go through your body, and breath is one of the easiest ways to get energy out of your body. Movement too, yes, going to do yoga, going for a run, moving your body, dancing, laughing. Those are all really great ways to move it. Shaking, actually just sitting there shaking, right? Great ways to move. But we don't always have the ability or the opportunity to get up and move our body. But one of the things that we can always do is breathe. If you can pay attention and learn these and practice these, it'll be easier when you're stressed out. So I recommend doing these different exercises on your own when you're not stressed, so that way when you're stressed, you can do it. So the first one I'm going to go over is a really common one, and I'm going to explain it and then also explain when and where you should use it, because people say use it all the time and it's not one to be used all the time. It is called box breathing. It's a technique developed by the Navy SEALs. Obviously, if you're, a Navy SEAL operation, right, you probably don't want to be stressed. You want to be more calm. So they developed this breathing exercise to help bring them kind of like, if you think about that stress response map, not be in that fight or flight response and kind of get back more into that executive network situation, and also that social engagement system, especially if they're there with their team, right? You want both of those systems activated. And so it's called box breathing because what you do is you breathe in for 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you breathe out for a count of 4, and then you hold it for a count of 4. And so what that looks like is breathe in, hold, out, in, or hold. Yeah, you get the point, right? So it's really useful when you're stressed, but it does not work really well when you're not stressed. So I find, and not just for me, but with my clients, that when you try to do that exercise and you're not in a really stressed thing, it actually may cause a sense of panic. Because if you think about what's happening in your body when you are relaxed, right? This box breathing is to actually slow everything down. If you are still already relaxed, or if you're really so super stressed that you're in like a flop state or a freeze state, where your body's starting to conserve resources and it's already got the brakes on, slowing it down is going to cause panic, right? Because you don't want to slow down. You actually, like, if you're already in this calm state, you don't want to go too low, right? You actually want to kind of bring it up. So this is one of the reasons why people in doctor's office, sometimes they'll faint and they'll be like, oh, you just got to calm and slow down. And it almost sends them into panic. This is something that has happened to me. I tried all of the different kind of techniques. And then once I understood the neurobiology of what was happening under stress, one day I was like, wait, that doesn't work. I'm not supposed to be slowing down. I'm actually supposed to be activating my sympathetic system and deactivating the parasympathetic. And then I learned like something so simple to do in that stressful situation. It's actually just like close your fists, like create fists and or growl if you go "Arr," like that. It's crazy. Like it totally switches you out of that like really reduced parasympathetic. So little side note and tidbit that hopefully like if that happens to you, you can use it and it totally helps and it totally works. Um, so now back to the breathing. So one of the other breathing exercises that I do recommend for people who are maybe in a freeze or a flap response, you will know because you will probably have very shallow breath. Because what happens is when we are in that response, we're taking a big, big breaths, deep breaths, right? So that we will have enough energy to be able to like get us out, right? And we already have the foot on the brake. So we are not exhaling as much, right? So we're taking deep breaths in and we are having really shallow exhales and deep breaths in and really shallow exhales. And you can see it like people hyperventilate, like taking really deep breaths in and they're not exhaling that much, right? So what is more important to do than that box breathing, because that box breathing may actually cause a panic, actually, is to just, it's super simple. And you can do this anytime. You don't even have to do it when you're in a stress state. And it's something I recommend practicing when you're not stressed, so that way you can do it when you are stressed. And what it is just count however many counts that for breathing in, hold for one count, and then breathe out for one more than what you breathed in for. So for example, I'm going to do it right now. I'm gonna hold one and then out. And what happens is when you breathe out just a little bit longer or a lot longer than what you breathed in for, it sends a signal to your brain that you're safe. And that is going to reduce your stress. And so you can trick your biology into feeling safe even when you're not safe. Because especially if it's like a stressor, like from people where you actually are physically safe, you're just maybe not emotionally safe, or you're like maybe your boss is like really mad and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose my shit because I'm hungry and I'm tired and I just don't know what to do. Do that breathing exercise. It's going to help calm you down because you are safe, right? You just don't want to go into that response thing. Or if like what happens with me, like my kids are driving me crazy and I don't want to yell at them because I know I'm going to, because I'm starting to lose it. I will do this so that way I calm down and don't lose it on losing my shit on my kids, right? So that's what these two extra breathing exercises. However, if you're in that fight or flight and you can tell like you're just like anxious and you just want to get out of there, do that box breathing. It's going to calm you right down, and it's going to be a really good way to get calm, right? Because it creates like it, the the parasympathetic sympathetic, right? It creates that even flow, right? Because we haven't activated that parasympathetic part yet. It's just the sympathetic. So it's just getting those in balance. Once that parasympathetic is activated in that freeze or flap, then you want to actually do that other little trick to change your biology so that way your brain thinks that you're safe. So those are the two breathing exercises. I hope that this all helped and that you understand your stress response more, and you'll probably start recognizing stress responses in other people, and hopefully you will take the actions that you need to get in balance, work on that physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And if you're a woman and you're interested, definitely check out my quantum sexuality program, because I will be going over all that, help you learn how to create the different practices to get in balance with these different aspects of it. And then because it is quantum sexuality, I'm also going to bring in the power of orgasm and some more energy work, like really fun, cool energy work where you'll learn how to like do some stuff. All right. So as I said, I hope you found this useful. And if you have any questions, please respond to the email with the link to the replay. And I will hopefully talk to you and see you soon. All right. Bye-bye.